Welcome to the D-Shift podcast, where we provide inspiration, motivation, and education to help you transition from the challenges of divorce to discover the freedom and ability to live life on your own terms. Are you ready? Let's get this shift started. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the D-Shift podcast. And as always, it is such a pleasure to have really experienced, super qualified people come to the podcast. I'm always kind of amazed that people of this caliber can talk on the podcast, to be honest with you. But I want to introduce you to my guest, who you have met before if you are a listener to the D-Shift. I'd like to introduce you to Lisa Zeiderman. She is the managing partner at Miller Zeiderman LLP, and she is based in New York. Lisa is a matrimonial attorney, CFL and CDFA, Certified Divorce Financial Analyst. And she is one of the unique attorneys, I think, that really helps people going through divorce focus in on all aspects of the divorce, because you do have that financial background as well as your years of legal expertise in the matrimonial field. So, Lisa, welcome.
Thank you. So pleased to be here.
Well, and I was so thrilled that you were able to come back on, because our last conversation, I think, was really, really important, and something we talked about financial abuse and how those kind of issues can impact a divorce. So today we're going to talk a little bit about another specialized area of divorce, and that's the so-called gray divorces. But before we hop into that, tell us a little bit about yourself and why you chose this particular area of focus, because I know you've had a lot of different working experiences in the past.
So thanks so much. And again, welcome everybody. I chose this really because I had gone through my own divorce. So as you know, and as anyone who would listen to probably the first podcast that I had done with you learned, I had been in the fashion business. I had a showroom on 7th Avenue, and I was very much in the fashion business. I had started out from high school working at Macy's New York, and then for a very large manufacturer on 7th Avenue, and then opened my own showroom and was working with young designers across the country, merchandising their lines to retailers, both specialty store and large retailers across the country. And then I went through my own divorce. And as I was going through my own divorce, I realized, unfortunately, how hard it was to get a great attorney, somebody who really was responsive, who was prepared for court, who would, really understand the case, who made sure that everything was put together and organized. And I found that there was really a lacking of attorneys who could put all of that together and respond to the client, which was at that point me. And as anyone who's going through a divorce knows, particularly when they are going through custody or high stakes financial divorces, they know that they want a response. Like right away would be good, but certainly within the day, within 24 hours, reasonable, right? There would be days and days that would go by, and that didn't suit me. And then I realized, I really find some of the high stakes financial matters interesting, the custody issues very interesting, and I could do this. And I had already figured out what I didn't find out there in terms of attorneys. And so I decided to go back to school, get my degree, go to law school. I went to Fordham Law, and then worked for several different attorneys, and then decided I really wanted to pursue opening my own firm, which I did in 2013. And so it's now going to be, I think, almost 12 years pretty soon that I'm going to have had my firm. We've grown it to about 50 people and about 22 to 25 attorneys, including an estates and trusts practice, and very exciting.
Yeah, and that's fantastic. How many people are that dedicated that they realize that they want to support people, so they spend all that time to go through, get a law degree? That's amazing that you did that. And I know that you offer that very personalized, bespoke experience for your clients. And I think that's amazing, because that's the biggest complaint I hear from my clients, is that they, send an email to their attorney, or they send a text, or they make a phone call, and they don't sometimes hear back ever about the question that they ask. Like, it's just kind of like it drops off the face of the earth. So, Lisa, let's talk a little bit about that specialized area of divorce. That's actually the biggest, the greatest growing component of the divorce sector is the gray divorce. So can you talk a little bit about what you see maybe as the differences or some of the things that women in particular going through a gray divorce need to think about that may be different if you're divorcing in your 20s, 30s, or 40s?
So I think that the biggest difference is that there are many people who, particularly women, who have given up their careers to stay home and support the family, right, in different ways. And either through supporting children and making sure that they're getting to their activities, their doctor's appointments, the dentist's appointments, making sure that the play dates are set, making sure that all of their homework is done and everything is organized for them. And then, and this is a bit stereotypical, but I would say there is quite a bit there are quite a bit of women who are certainly in this position who reach their 50s or even 60s, and they find themselves going through divorce, whether by their choice or their spouse's choice, and they realize that they don't have a career, and they really are dependent on their spouse for support. And the unfortunate truth is that support doesn't always occur for a very long time. It doesn't really necessarily always cover all of the lifestyle needs. And and I say this all the time, you're not on that same trajectory that you have that earning power to move from level to level, because if you're in your 50s or 60s, you're not necessarily going to get that job, that entry level job easily. And if you do, you're not going to be able to take that entry level job necessarily and be able to catapult and earn, frankly, millions of dollars the way your spouse might be able to do this. And because you've lost all of that earning power time, right? Your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, okay? And now you're in your 50s. And so while you may get a job, okay, maybe you'll start a career, a small business perhaps, which may be the best opportunity of all, right? But bottom line is you don't have that growth, that time for growth. Right. And so it becomes so difficult for women in particular who have sacrificed for the family to get back into the workforce, to have the earning power, and to actually be able to maintain their lifestyle. Because even if they're getting the assets, that half of the assets, it still may not suffice to carry on the lifestyle.
Yeah, I thank you for saying that, because I really do believe that. I mean, the world, there's so many possibilities. And I think, one of my clients said to me the other day, 70 is the new 40. And I thought, it kind of is, because a lot of people are not planning on retiring. They're planning on maybe fading out to part-time, or maybe, like you say, going on to an entrepreneurship, and then you can set your own hours and you can work from, you can be a digital nomad and travel the world and still work. But that still takes money to do that. Like, it's not free, and it takes a while to get established. So I really appreciate you saying that. What about, and I'm going to ask you this because I know you work specifically in New York. So your answer is, again, we're not providing legal advice or services, and this is just an information and education podcast. If Lisa's, what is your perspective on the opportunity for permanent alimony in most areas? Like, I know there's different little pockets around the country and around the world, but what in the United States, what do you see as permanent alimony? Is that kind of a dream?
I think that's faded out. Certainly in New York, I can speak for New York, unless there is a special circumstance. And unless your marriage is very long, sometimes you can get it if your marriage is very long. But, the question becomes, what does permanent alimony mean? Because even if you are looking at permanent alimony, how many years is it going to be? Right. And what you're really asking is it going to be non-durational? Will it continue until you die? Right. That's really what we're asking. And the answer is usually not. Okay. It's a no, because your spouse at some point is also going to stop working. Right. And whether it be at 70 or at 80 or at 75 or at 65. Right. And there you are. And yes, you've gotten your share of the assets, but how long does your spouse have to work to support your lifestyle? And so that's the other, I think, tricky part in terms of gray divorce, because if your spouse is 70 or 65 and you are, let's say, 60 or 65, and you are trying to get your career going, you don't have that same ability to get upstarted with your spouse for a long period of time, right? Because they're going to be leaving the workforce too at some point.
Right, right.
And they have a right to retire too. And so it becomes a problem, because if you were in your 20s or 30s, probably your 30s really, or 40s even, there could be a lengthy period of time when you have alimony, and you can then go back to school, perhaps get another degree, get a different certification, have some time to get your feet on the ground, and you don't necessarily have that now.
Yeah, and that is so true. And I hear a lot of states use, or a lot of jurisdictions use sort of a half of the length of the marriage as sort of the maximum amount that you can expect for alimony. And you know, again, it's situational, right? And I do think that sometimes women in particular forget that once they divorce their husband, or even if they stayed married to him, he has the right to decide to retire. And
Exactly.
then that is going to impact their ability to pay. What about the idea, and I've seen this a couple of times, or what do you think about having that life insurance policy where the wife or the ex-wife at this point still stays as the beneficiary, as sort of that cushion that might provide some support should the husband pass away prior to the end of the alimony deadline or term?
So great question. So the life insurance is really important to have. And certainly it's important to have, at least to make sure that your alimony is actually guaranteed by the life insurance. Because if your alimony is for a lengthy period of time and your spouse were to die, you need to make sure that you have that backed up with life insurance, right? So we usually ask that the amount of the support be covered by the life insurance amount, and that the wife be the beneficiary of that. Now, your question is a little different. Does she stay on that life insurance policy long after the alimony has run out? And the question really, again, goes to age, and we're talking about gray divorce. And sometimes these life insurance policies end at a certain age, and then you would need to renew a life insurance policy, and your spouse may not be in the best health at that point, or it may get very, very expensive depending upon the age, right? And it may be prohibitively expensive, as a matter of fact, to keep life insurance in place for the duration of that spouse's life. Right. And so the answer is it depends. If there are significant assets, then maybe it's not needed. If there are significant assets, then maybe you can pay for the higher amount of premiums that the life insurance is going to cost. But it's important to look and to see when the life insurance is supposed to terminate according to the policy that you're dealing with, because they do not usually go on forever.
Right, right. Lisa, what else? I know we've covered those two kind of big topics, the alimony and how to protect yourself. What else are some of the things that are common questions you hear from your clients who are in this gray divorce situation?
So I am going to go back to the life insurance, because it's such an important topic, and I really want to make sure and that we talk about it. So life insurance is really important to make sure that it's in place. And one of the things I think people often overlook is making sure that it's in place from year to year, that the premiums have actually been paid, that nobody has overlooked paying the premiums. Usually we put in a clause whereby somebody can get all the information directly from the life insurance company to make sure that the premiums have been paid, that they are notified if premiums are actually late or have not been paid, so that they can instead pay those premiums, and then they can go into court to enforce that the ex-spouse reimburse them for the premiums. But it's very important that the language in your agreement be there, so to make sure that this life insurance is in place. And then once the language is in there, you need to make sure that you actually follow up on this each year. Because, and maybe if you have somebody who is often delinquent, more often, because once that life insurance expires, okay, or is terminated for non-payment, then you have a real problem if your spouse dies. And don't think it doesn't happen, because it does.
But I have a question to ask you then. This is interesting because this just popped into my mind. If you have a requirement in your divorce decree, and again, we're not providing legal advice. If you had a requirement in your divorce decree that the husband maintain, say, $100,000 of life insurance, I'm just making up numbers.
Yep.
And let's say he stops making payments, you don't know about it, he passes away, the step kids now get everything. Does that divorce decree supersede anything on his estate? Like, could you go back to probate court and get compensated?
So actually what would end up happening, and we're going through this actually, is that you are going to be arguing with the life insurance company about who is going to actually be in control. And I do believe there's a court order so that you would be the person in control, but you're going to be in a situation where you need to litigate it, which is why. So it had, let's just say that your ex-spouse changed the beneficiary, and you had that court order, that judgment, to your point, that said you were the sole beneficiary, you were the exclusive beneficiary, you were the beneficiary in this amount. And then instead of doing what your spouse was supposed to do, he actually decided he's going to make his new wife or somebody else the beneficiary. You're going, and then he dies, you're going to be fighting that with the life insurance company, who probably will bring the whole thing to court to let a court decide that. But in the meantime, your money is delayed. You don't have your money, and you also are now back in litigation. And so it's super important to make sure that you are being notified. You should be notified if there is certainly non-payment, and perhaps being able to see all the life insurance information to make sure that you are the beneficiary of the life insurance, and that continues, so that if you learn before the person dies, okay, that the life insurance beneficiary has been changed, you can do something about it. We have, I will tell you, this has become more and more of an issue, and we have probably 5 cases right now in my office about life insurance right now. People who haven't paid, people who haven't named the person the beneficiary, people who aren't turning over the papers. We've been in court with contempt motions about it. So it's actually really important.
Yeah, thank you for that. And thank you for, making that more of a clear point, because sometimes we tend to skip over these really what seem like basic things, but they can end up really coming back and biting you if there is, heaven forbid, we don't want anything bad to happen to anybody, but people do pass away, especially as they're getting older. You have to worry about that a little more. So what else, Lisa? What are some of the what's one other common question you get?
So certainly the alimony issue, I think people want to make sure that they're going to have enough, right? That's the question. Are they going to have enough in retirement, particularly in gray divorce, right? And looking at these retirement accounts and looking at the assets, and then working with some sort of a wealth advisor is probably a good idea. A CDFA is great, but you should work with someone who actually is going to be able to look at your budget and figure out what your earning potential is, which you probably are doing all of this during your divorce anyway, and then figuring out how much you need every year and how much your assets will throw off, okay, in terms of dividends and distributions, and that you will be able to reach, let's say, age 95, and that you will have enough. Right. And that's going to be very important. And then you can figure out what do I have to earn to do that? What do I need in terms of support? What do I need in terms of assets? Do I need to actually cut back on my lifestyle? That may be something you have to do. OK, but you should work with a financial advisor to figure that out.
What about, let me throw this in. It might be a little bit of a wrench in the monkey, whatever that saying is. What about adult children that sometimes are not very open to this whole idea, and they sometimes try to do their own legal shenanigans around what's going to happen with money and things like that during the divorce? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So we have had lots of cases where adult children get themselves involved, and it doesn't usually go well. Somebody's relationship, unfortunately, will be scorched because of it. I think adult children should be kept out of the mix. Sometimes they're involved in a business that is being valued. Sometimes they are, they have their own ideas about where assets should go. I think that this is not the adult children's money. And I think it's really important to remember that they haven't necessarily earned it, and they haven't. It's not their marriage, and the concept of bringing them in, of introducing them into the situation, I think should be looked at carefully, because they are not your negotiator. They are your children. And they should be able to have a great relationship with both their parents whenever possible. And they should be able to have their children and your grandchildren should be able to have, a great relationship. And it is best that you and your spouse figure this out with your attorneys and keep the adult children out wherever possible. But that also means the adult children need to stay out of it, right? Because sometimes they insert themselves into it, and that becomes difficult.
Right. And it's interesting you mentioned that family business, because that's unfortunately where I see with some of my clients, and those adult children, they have their own agenda in that negotiation. They may not be on mom or dad's side. They're really
100%.
Yeah.
That is 100% true. And it is more difficult with family businesses. But I think that, again, this is not about, when you've got your equitable distribution, when you receive your support, your equitable distribution, everything, you can decide what you're going to give to your adult children.
Right.
Okay. But the point is, first, you should set yourself up, and it goes to oxygen mask first, right, on yourself, and then you can help others. And I think that that's the key to the entire thing.
Yeah. And thank you. And we're almost out of time, but I do want to just touch on one other area that I see comes up in gray divorces that I think needs to be really carefully considered. And that is, who's going to retain the matrimonial property? Because quite often, people in their 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s, you may be looking at retiring and traveling, or you may be looking at, spending your summers in Florida and your winters in, Montana, whatever it might be you decide on doing. And quite frankly, the matrimonial home may not be suitable for either adult. It could be old. It could be falling, need a lot of repairs. And one thing I see a lot of times is people hanging on to the matrimonial home because they think their kids want it, and their kids don't want it either. So can you talk a little bit about that one?
Yes. So we do see this quite a bit. So I would say that, first of all, you should obviously look at the home, like step away and look at it. Is it going to be appropriate for you to be aging in? Does it have, is it one level, for example? You might not have a 1 or 2 level home. Does it have huge capital gains? Because if it does, there could be huge taxes if you decide to sell it in the future. And that's really important, because while you're married, you actually have a $500,000 deduction. And so that won't be taxed. When you're single, it's $250,000 that won't be taxed. Plus, you're actually, if you take the marital home, it's very likely that you are taking on the tax burden yourself completely. And so it just may not make financial sense to do it. Additionally, to your point, while you think of it as some sort of a legacy for your children may have a very different idea of what they want. And by the way, they might have spouses also that come into their lives, and their spouses might have ideas. And think about it. If both sets of parents have gone through a divorce and they both have that idea of the legacy, then we've got 2 houses now that each of those kids are supposed to be in that are getting married. So it didn't make sense, right? I think it goes back to do what works for you, okay? Your children will likely understand. They are going to have their own lives and their own home. I think the difference is when it comes to a vacation home. When it comes to a vacation home, I sort of understand that sometimes you might want to keep the vacation home because it's a gathering place. And it's a place where, to your point, maybe there's a Montana home or there is a Florida home, and that brings everybody together at your home. And I can understand that that might be something that you'd want to keep, because that is a place you gather for Thanksgiving, for Christmas, for all of the holidays, and your grandchildren come, and it's set up for all of that. Different situation, I think. And again, I think it just depends on your finances. If you can afford to do that, that's great.
Yeah.
The last thing I'm going to say about the marital home is now it's even becoming much harder, because if you have a mortgage, you also have interest rates that have increased substantially. And so while you might have had interest rates while you were paying the mortgage at 2 or 3%, it may now be that it's at 7%. And it just may not be affordable to keep the marital home.
Right. Because quite often you have to requalify. You don't just keep assuming the same mortgage. So you have to think of all these things. That's why it's so important to have a financial person and an attorney if you're not able to work with Lisa, who can provide those services in one person, which is really nice. Lisa, We've talked about a ton of stuff today. And as always, we probably could talk a lot more about this. There's never enough time. What do you think is the most important thing out of everything we've talked about, or the information you share with your clients that you think would be relevant for people listening in today?
Look, I think for any divorce, I'm going to say this, and I've said this very often, you need to understand your finances. You need to actually really look at the financial situation, and you need to be realistic about it. You also need to make sure you have the stamina, or find the stamina to go through the process. And don't just, say, oh, it doesn't matter, I'll figure it out later. You should be figuring it out now. You should be working with skilled professionals who are going to help you figure out what your finances actually are, what your budget really is, and so that you understand what your capacity is to be able to retain assets, which assets you should retain, which assets you should not retain, what your situation is. Maybe you have to cut back, maybe you don't have to cut back, but very important. And then making sure that you get your fair share. And that may take some stamina. Don't let somebody wear you down.
Thank you. Thank you. Great advice. Lisa, if people want to find out more about your law firm and the services you provide, what's the best way to do that?
So they can go to lisazeiderman.com, which is a blog that I have, and it's got contact information and all of that. So lisazeiderman.com. And they could also email me at lz@mzw-law.com. And they can just call 914-455-1000. And I'm going to put one other link on there that might be helpful to people. So I am, as you probably know, I'm chair of a board, Savvy Ladies, which is geared towards women's financial empowerment, women's financial literacy. Very helpful people there to help with your financial questions. You are paired free of charge, one-to-one, with financial professionals. So it's savvyladies.org. Or you could download the Savvy Ladies app on your phone.
I will make sure all of that information gets in the chat. And Savvy Ladies is phenomenal. I have sent a few clients that way, and they come back with rave reviews about being able to speak to somebody who took the time to answer all their financial questions. So, Lisa, thanks for all you do, and thanks for being on the podcast today.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And I want to thank everybody for listening in, and don't forget to tune in to next week's episode of The D Shift. Thanks for listening and supporting the D Shift podcast. If you would like to attend live trainings by our amazing guests and have a chance to ask questions and get answers from our experts, join the D Shift crew. For more details and to sign up, head on over to www.divorcecoachforwomen and click on the podcast page.